Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. This week we have the great zchus of reading Parshat Vayishlach. Parshat Vayishlach is basically dominated by two dramatic stories of Yaakov and his family. The first one is the encounter with Esav, which involves, all kinds of fears, correct and not correct. And then, of course, the encounter with Shechem, the tragic rape of Dinah, and the responses of Shimon and Levi. And I want to look at both of those stories. We've done some of these Rambans before, but I think I have new things and different things to say for some of them. So first of all, it's interesting. This week's Parsha starts with an introduction by the Ramban. It's like he's telling us an overview of the whole Parsha and what we should look out for. It says the Ramban, Nichteva Parsha Azot Lahodia ki hitzil hakadosh baruch hu et avdo uge'alo miyad chazak mimenu. Right? The theme of the Parsha is HaKadosh Baruch Hu interfering in this world and saving Yaakov Avinu from forces that were stronger than him. Vayishlach malach vayatzilehu, and a malach was sent to save him. That's one. Two, ulalamdenu od, shehu lo batach b'tzidko, v'hishtadel b'hatzala b'chol yicholto. A major theme in the Ramban in this week's Parsha and elsewhere is Ein somchim al hanes. And he says the second thing we learn from this Parsha is that Yaakov Avinu was proactive. Yaakov Avinu didn't just decide, okay, Esav might kill me, I'm going to say Tehillim. He said Tehillim, but he made a plan, and he did things to save himself. V'yesh ba'od remez l'dorot, ki kol asher ira la'avotenu im Esav echav, ye'arel lanu tamin im b'nei Esav. Says the Ramban, one of the great themes of this Parsha is the famous line, Masa avosim labanim, that the things that happen with Esav are going to happen to us. V'ra'ui lanu, now he's going to come back to the second point. V'ra'ui lanu le'echoz b'darko shel tzadik. We have to follow the path of Yaakov Avinu. Shenazmin atzmeinu lishloshet hadvarim shehizminhu et atzmo. We have to do exactly what Yaakov Avinu did, the famous three. Tfilah, daron, a gift or bribe, ulahatzala kidech milchama, livroch ulinatzel, to make a plan to win a war or to escape somehow. Ukfa ra'u rabotenu haremez hazeh min haparsha azot kasher azkir. And Chazal saw all of these points in the individual psukim, as the Ramban will point out. We'll do some of them, we can't do all of them. But the bigger point, why the Ramban, and it's not fair really for me to psychoanalyze the Ramban, and I could be wrong. But the sense you get in the Ramban is that, first of all, he lived through difficult times. Not the worst times in Jewish history, but certainly, clashes with the church and things like that. And the Ramban was telling his people at the time, it's not enough to daven. Of course we have to daven. Of course we need HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intervention. But we also have to do it on our own. And to translate to our days, we also need an army. We also need to put our lives on the line. We have to protect Am Yisrael. We have to fight for them. It's not enough to just learn Torah. It's not enough to just say Tehillim. We need something more than that. And the Ramban basically says it explicitly here. He connects the two ideas, right? We have to do exactly what Yaakov did. We have to prepare ourselves for three different things. The tefillah, le daron, and le milchama. And the sense you get is that one without the others is not enough. And, it seems so obvious, and it is obvious in the Ramban, and yet, for reasons that we don't have to explain right now, it's something that I feel that I should point out to everybody, even though I'm sure everybody saw it already. Okay, let's take a good example of what the Ramban's talking about. In Perek Lamed Bet, I think we're in Perek Lamed Bet. Yes. We read the following. The Torah says, Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo. Right after he sends the malachim with the gifts for Esav, Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo, vayachatz et ha'am asher ito ve'et hatzon ve'et habakar v'hagmalim l'shnei machanot. Why? Vayomer. Im yavo Esav ala machaneh ha'achat v'hikahu v'haya ha'machaneh ha'nishar lifleita. Right? Esav's not going to wipe us out completely. We're going to stop him somehow. And if he tries to do something bad to us, at least half of us will survive. Says the Ramban, Vayira Yaakov ma'od. Ba'avu she'amru lo ki yatsa Esav me'iro v'hu ba likrat Yaakov. The Malachim came back. The Ramban thinks, even though it's not explicit in the Psukim, that Esav did not accept the Malachim. Right? He refused to meet them. So Yaakov says, okay, he's coming in my direction. Va'od. Shelakach imo anashim rabim arba me'od. He has 400 men with him. Haya yarei lenafsho ma'od. He was terrified. Ki amar lo lakach kalela rak li lachem bi. I don't know for sure, but it looks really bad. He wouldn't have taken 400 men to make peace with me. He would take 400 men to wipe me out. V'hanireh be'einai be'inyan hazeh, says the Ramban. Ki Esav lo kibel hashluchim kahogen v'lo ishkiach alehem. Esav didn't accept the messengers. He didn't talk to the messengers. He didn't relate to them. V'ulai lo hayu lefanav ki lo natan reshut she'avo lefanav v'yidabru imo klal. Maybe they never met him. Maybe Esav told the people around him, I don't want to meet these messengers. They have no right to come see me. Why didn't Esav, if he met them, he would have asked them all these questions about Yaakov. And he would have said, okay, I'm so happy to see my brother. I want to meet him again. I want to hug him and kiss him. I want to see him. Right? Then they would have told Yaakov, and he wouldn't have been so worried. But none of that's in the Psukim, and the Ramban thinks it's too important for the Torah not to tell us if it had happened. Aval evrato shimura belibo. His hatred for Yaakov was in place. V'lasot lo ra'ah hayahu holech b'chayil hazeh. Yes, and exactly what Yaakov feared is exactly why Esav was coming. Esav was angry still, and Esav was going to wipe him out. V'hinei hashluchim chakru b'machaneh. The messengers talked to the people in Esav's camp. V'yadu ki hu holech likrat Yaakov. And they knew that he's coming to do something evil to Yaakov. V'zeh ta'am v'gam ki amru banu el achicha el Esav v'lo anau tanu davar v'lo shalach lecha davar shalom. We came to Esav, it's true, and we said what we said, directly to him or to his camp. But he didn't respond in any way. V'gam holech likratcha bizra v'chayil. He's coming with an army. Ulekach hosif lo pachad al pachado. So Yaakov Avinu became even more frightened. Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo. V'kach amru rabotenu ki hashluchim hikiru bo sinah. The messengers saw that Esav hated Yaakov. V'amru banu el achicha el Esav, ata noheg bo ke'ach. Right, you treat him like a brother. V'hu noheg bimcha ke'Esav, the famous medrash. Right, he's still Esav. Okay, so what happened? So it's really shocking. The Ramban thinks until the last minute, Esav was coming to wipe out Yaakov. He was angry. He was bringing an army, and the purpose is exactly as Yaakov had feared. Aval basof ka'asher ra'ah hakavod hagadol she'asa lo Yaakov v'asher hipil atzmo lefanav shehishtachavo arza sheva pamim me'rachok ad gishto elav. When he saw all the gifts, and he saw Yaakov Avinu bowing 7 times until he reached him, and he saw Yaakov Avinu basically calling him Adoni Esav, implying or even stating that he is the Bechor and he is the dominant force in the family and Yaakov is not, Nichmeru Rachamav. Right? That's, I think, the Malach that God sent to help Yaakov. That Esav's coming in full anger, and in a split second he changes his mind. He doesn't just say, I'm going to consider not killing you. They hug and they kiss and and he wants to be with him. The Ramban elsewhere in our parsha talks about how Esav saw Yaakov's, subservience to him as being a sign that Yaakov doesn't really think he's the Bechor, that Esav is the real Bechor. And he felt bad. Ki halavavot lahashem heima. Right? Emotion, says the Ramban, is given over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that moment, Esav's emotion overcame his intellect, shall we call it. And he said, okay, Yaakov Avinu is treating me the way he's treating me. He's telling me that I'm the real Bechor. He's treating me with respect. He's my brother. And nichmeru rachamav l'chol asher yachpotz yateotam. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervenes. The sense you get from the Ramban is till the last moment, Esav wanted to kill Yaakov. And maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have made another miracle, and Yaakov could have won a war and done all these different things. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose to change Esav's mind at that moment, to make Esav feel Yaakov's true love or fake love, and to turn Esav's heart, and that's exactly what happened. So there was real reason for Yaakov to be frightened. And he was frightened, as the Ramban says in the intro. But in the end, because maybe b'zchus the fact that he made all these different plans, and that he prepared all the gifts for Esav, and that he davened also, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu had rachum on Yaakov Avinu and saved him. Okay. Now, before this, maybe it's after this, before this, chronologically in the story, Yaakov has the fight with the Malach, right? The Malach shel Esav. And at the end of that fight, we find as follows, right? The Malach is, Yaakov Avinu, our sense is winning the fight somehow. And then we read as follows. The Malach says, the Malach says in Pasuk Chal Hey, Vayar ki lo yacholo. The Malach sees that he couldn't win. Vayiga b'kaf yerecho, and he dislocates Yaakov's hip. Vateka kaf yerech Yaakov be'av koimo. Vayom shalchein ki lo hashachar. Vayom lo hashalechacha ki be'achtani. Asked him his name, etc., etc. What does it mean? We love Yaakov Avinu, obviously, and we believe in his strength, and we believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what does it mean that a Malach couldn't beat Yaakov? Is a Malach Hashem? He's limited in strength. He's limited in ability. Right? That's something that has to be dealt with. And so says the Ramban, that's not what's happening here. The Malach says, Vayar ki lo yacholo. Malachav giborei koach osed devaro. Malachim have unlimited power, but they have unlimited power to do God's bidding. Va'al kain lo yacholo hamalach lahaziko ki lo hursha rak b'ma she'asaimo leheka kaf yerecho. The Malach didn't have permission from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to hurt Yaakov worse than he did. Vayar ki lo yacholo, the Malach knew, I'm not allowed to beat Yaakov. Those are the rules. I do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me. V'amu b'bereishis rabbah, naga b'cholat tzadikim she'atidim lihiyot mimeno, zeh doro shel shmad. V'ha'inyan, ki ha'me'ora kulo remez l'dorotav, sheyeh dor bizaro shel Yaakov, yitgaber Esav alehem ad sheyeh karov l'kakeh beitzatan. Okay, so says the Ramban, more than this, Masa avosim and labanim. The Torah is telling us that yes, there will be generations in which Esav has success, in which Esav is close to wiping out the Jewish people, like the Malach was close to wiping out Yaakov. Vayazan, the Ramban says, there is a generation like that, the generation of Yehuda ben Bava, where people said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you want me to die al Kiddush Hashem, I can do that. But if you want me to live through a generation where I have to see all the pain and all the suffering and all the hurt, that's too much for me. And I often think when I read this Ramban, it's on Pasuk Chavav, you should read it inside, I think of the Holocaust, right? It's not just that people died, they had to watch other people die, they had to suffer for years, there's a whole process. But says the Ramban, that's what's going to happen. The Malach can come within an inch of wiping out Klal Yisrael, but in the end he can't do it. In the end, HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't let him do it. But there is real suffering, there is real pain, and there is real evil in Esav, and in the way he's going to treat us going forward. But at the end of the day, we have God's word that Esav and his malachim are not going to be able to wipe us out, and God's word, is the final word. Now, elsewhere, the Ramban points out that the Rambam says that it didn't really happen; it was just a dream. And the Ramban says something like, Asur lishma lidvarim ka'ela, and more than that, Asur lahamino, right? He says the Rambam is wrong. It's a strange thing, right? The Ramban was not a big fan of the Moreh Nevuchim, and yet he defended the Moreh Nevuchim, and nevertheless, the most famous passages in the Moreh Nevuchim are famous because the Ramban quotes them ala Torah. And so he quotes this famous Rambam that sometimes the Torah tells us things that are dreams. And here he says to the Rambam, what are you talking about? Yaakov limped in the morning because his hip was dislocated. Was it just like he dreamt it and then he felt it in the morning, as sometimes happens? he completely rejects the Rambam. But you should know there is such a Rambam, and there is a Ramban that rejects it. Now, let's go to the second big story in this week's parsha, and that's the story of Shechem. Okay, Shechem ben Chamor kidnaps and rapes Dinah, and then wants to cut a deal with the Bnei Yaakov. And here the Ramban deals with a question that all of us would have asked ourselves at some point, which is, well, who was right? Did Yaakov Avinu really want to make a deal with them? And then Shimon and Levi wipe out the whole town, and so Yaakov's angry at them? Or did Yaakov Avinu know? And if Yaakov Avinu knew that they weren't going to keep their word, then why did he get so angry at Shimon and Levi? And he was angry at Shimon and Levi. So says the Ramban. Okay, Vayanu b'nei Yaakov et Shechem ve'et Chamor aviv b'mirma. Hine, Chamor u'Shechem el avia ve'el achea dibru. The first thing says the Ramban, if you notice in the Psukim, Yaakov Avinu never talks. So he says, yes, Chamor and Shechem come to the Bnei Yaakov. But Yaakov doesn't speak to them. Ki banav yidabru b'mukamo binyan hazeh lichvodo. Ki ba'avur hayot hadavar lahem lekalon lo yirtzu sheyiftach piv ledaber bo klal. Okay, the first thing is Yaakov Avinu doesn't speak to them. It's like Yaakov Avinu doesn't negotiate with terrorists. His sons will do it for him. So, but Yaakov is extremely passive in this back and forth. Now, v'yesh kan she'ela, says the Ramban. You can ask the following question, and when the Ramban says v'yesh kan she'ela, I think he means people in shul ask me this question all the time. Shehadavar nireh ki b'ratzon avihu v'atzato anu ki lifanav hayu v'yahayodea ma'aneh ki b'mimo yidaberu. Yaakov Avinu was there. He knew, the sense you get is that he supported his sons. He knew that they were lying. He knew they weren't going to let Dinah marry Chamor. V'im kein lama ka'asa. Why do you get so angry afterwards? Va'od. Shelo yitachen sheyeh ritzono lahasi bito leknani asher timei ota. It can't be that Yaakov Avinu wanted Dinah to marry Shechem. V'hinei kol ha'achim anu ha'ma'aneh hazeh b'mirma. The Torah testifies b'mirma. So Rashi says b'chachma, but almost certainly it has some negative connotation, some connotation of dishonesty. V'Shimon v'Levi levadam asu amasa, and Shimon and Levi, went out and massacred the town. V'av arar apam lahem levadam, and then Yaakov Avinu curses their anger. So what happened exactly? Was Yaakov Avinu in favor of it or not? So says the Ramban, v'hatshuva ki hamirma hayta ba'amram lihimo lahem kol zachar. Right, that was dishonest, that they had to have bris milah. But what was the original plan? Ki chashvu shelo ya'asu kein b'nei ha'ir. They thought to themselves, imagine this, you go to the town hall meeting, and here I often think to myself, were there hundreds of people in Shechem? Were there thousands? Were there tens of thousands? But they come to a town hall meeting, and Shechem says to them, I want to marry this girl, and it's going to be great for us. We're going to have economic relations with them, and they're rich people, and it's going to support us, it'll be good for everybody. All you have to do is cut off a piece, right? So Bnei Yaakov thought, they're not going to do that. The people are going to say, what, are you out of your mind? You want to have this girl? Fine, cut off a piece of your own, But we're not going to do that. And if in fact a miracle happens and they do it, and they're all circumcised, fine, they'll come into the palace, and they'll take Dinah back, and they'll leave. And that'll be the whole thing. Okay, and that's what everybody agreed to. V'Shimon v'Levi ratzu lihinakei mehem. No, but Shimon and Levi couldn't stand it, and they wanted revenge. V'hargu kol anshe ha'ir. And so to that, Yaakov Avinu was angry. He agreed to the plan. The plan was, we're taking Dinah back and we're not letting her intermarry. There's no chance of that. But Shimon and Levi overstepped their bounds, wiped out the town, and Yaakov Avinu, was furious about that. Now, says the Ramban, it's also possible v'yitachen sheyah kas li Yaakov she'arar apam al shehargu anshe ha'ir asher lo chatulo. Right? It could be that one of the problems that Yaakov saw was that they killed, and I want to use the word advisedly, they killed innocent bystanders. They hadn't done anything. And this leads into a major machlokas, the Rambam and the Ramban. I think we talked about it last year. Whether all of Shechem was chayiv misa. The Ramban thinks that Shimon and Levi were enforcing Zayin Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. They should have stopped Chamor and Shechem. When they didn't, they too became chayiv misa. And the Ramban thinks it doesn't extend that far. The 7 Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, all the lo sases, it's true. are a chiv misa, but the assay of dinim, of making court systems of chosh and mishpat, that you don't get misa for. And when they killed the people in Shechem, that was why Yaakov Avinu got so angry at Shimon and Levi, and he got angry at Shimon and Levi till the end of his life. If you recall, in Vizos HaBracha, Yaakov, doesn't curse them, curses their anger. Arur apam kiyaz ve'evratam ki kashasa achal kem Yaakov afitzem Yisrael. Right? Even when nothing bad happens, because it sounds like Yaakov Avinu says to them. It's an interesting point in the Ramban. Yaakov Avinu says to them, what happens if all the nations get gathered together now? Vihikuni eim al banim, and they'll wipe me out again. I just survived Esav, now I'm going to be killed by the other people. But that in the Torah, that didn't happen. He didn't have a war. God put his fear on the surrounding nations, and even though Bnei Yaakov wiped out Shechem, nothing happened. And nevertheless, at the end of his life, Yaakov Avinu is still angry. And the sense you get in the Ramban and in the Psukim is that Yaakov Avinu was angry because it was an immoral thing to do. It was a wrong thing to do. The people of Shechem were not chayiv misa. They may have been bad people, but according to the Ramban, they were not chayiv misa, and therefore Yaakov Avinu retained his anger at Shimon and Levi until the end of his life. Okay, that's a much longer Ramban. I just read parts of it, but that is in Perek Lamed Daled Pasuk Yud Bet. If you want to, do a Ramban over Shabbos, that's a great one to do. Now, there's a strange pasuk. The Torah is just going through the natural narrative, and then you come in pasuk in Perek Lamed Hey, pasuk Chet. We read as follows: Vatama divora meineket Rivka vatikaver mitachat lebeitel tachat ha'alon vayikra shmo alon bachut. Who is divora meineket Rivka? And why is the Torah, the narrative, interrupted by her death? We never met her before. We don't know anything about her. Says the Ramban, Lo yadati lama nichnas hapasuk hazeh bein vayikra lamakom el beitel ubein vayera Elohim al Yaakov od. Right? Those are critical to the story. Why interrupt it with this pasuk? V'ivsik binyan acher shaya bevat achat u'makom echad ki Yaakov b'vo'o luza hi beitel bana mizbech v'kara lamakom el beitel v'nira laho Elokim sham vayivarach oto v'lama hu sama katuv hazeh b'toch inyan acher echad. Why are we interrupted by this pasuk? V'hakarov ma she'amru rabotenu she'yirmoz lemitat Rivka. Says the Ramban, it makes sense that the Chazal actually have the pshat in this pasuk. It's not really talking about the Devorah, she did die, but it's hinting to the fact that Rivka had died. V'lachein kara shem hamakom ahu alon bachut, ki ein bechi ve'anka al haminika hazot, hazikena she'yikra sham hamakom alav. You don't cry over the meineket, over the wet nurse, over the helper. You cry over your mother. Aval Yaakov bacha v'hitabel al imo hatzadeket asher ahavtehu v'shilcha oto sham v'lo zachta liroto b'shuvo. Right? Yaakov Avinu was looking forward to seeing his mother. She had saved his life. She had sent him to the house of Lavan. Now he was coming back triumphantly with a big family, with much wealth. V'lachein nigla elav ha'elokim u'verachoto l'nachamo kasher asa liyitzchak aviv acharei mot Avraham u'vishnehem amru chachamim birkat avelim birko. Right? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Yaakov Avinu now, he's coming for a Shiva visit because he's lost his mother. Okay, now, it makes complete sense, except for one last point, which is, so why doesn't the Torah just say Rivka died? She's a significant figure. It's true. The Torah doesn't say that Leah died. And you could argue in different ways, Leah wasn't, and she was buried in the Marat HaMachpelah, but you could argue in different ways, Leah wasn't that important to the narrative, don't know. But Rivka was critical, and if Yaakov was looking forward to seeing her, why doesn't the Torah tell us? And so again, we don't have time to read this whole Ramban, but the Ramban then explains that Yitzchak Avinu was blind and didn't ever leave the house. So he didn't go to the funeral. Yaakov wasn't there, so he didn't go to the funeral. So who's left? Esav. Now, two possibilities. Esav either hates his mother, because his mother supported Yaakov in getting the Bechorah, or Esav, just Esav. So he goes to the funeral. But it reminds people that Rivka was the mother of Esav, and that yields, kind of harsh feelings towards Esav, and maybe to the woman who gave birth to him. So the Torah doesn't basically explain that it was Rivka because she's the mother of Esav, and in the Torah at least, Esav is not a person to be admired. And if you're the mother of a person not to be admired, so the Torah hides your death in a way that people know, but they don't know for sure. Okay, one last one. At the end of the parsha, Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Tez Zayin, says the Torah, after Rachel dies, Vatel Rachel Vatchash Belidita, right? She gives birth to Binyamin. It's very, very bad. Vatamat Rachel Vatikaver B'derech Efrata Hi Beit Lachem. Vayatsev Yaakov Matzeval Kfurata Hi Matzevet Kfurat Rachel Ad Hayom. Vayisa Yisrael Vayet Me'ala. Okay, and then he has to bury her there. B'derech Efrata Hi Beit Lachem. The Ramban, and I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. This is one of the most famous ones. The Ramban, when he came to Eretz Yisrael at the end of his life, wrote some tikkunim, or some changes, to his Perish al Torah. And this is one of the most famous ones. Because originally the Ramban thought that that Rachel was buried in a place called Ramah, right? Kol b'Ramah nishma yehi b'chi tamarim rachem avakal al baneha, that she was buried in the Chelek of Binyamin, in a place called Ramah. And then the Ramban gets to Eretz Yisrael, and he sees where Efrat is, and he sees how close Efrat is to Marat HaMachpelah in Chevron, and he changes his whole position. And he says, Ba'od Kivrat Eretz, right? He says, now that I got here, let me see if I can find it quickly. He says, now that I've gotten to Eretz Yisrael and I see, she wasn't buried in Har Ephraim. That's not true. She was buried close to Marat HaMachpelah, and Yaakov Avinu could have in fact taken her there if he wanted to. It's only like a half a day's journey. It's completely different. But he didn't. And that's why he had to explain later on to Yosef, when he asked Yosef to bury him, that he buried Rachel al derech so she could come out and cry for our children and daven for her. But this, Perek Lamed Hey Pasuk Tezayin, is a really great example in the Ramban where he says, Va'achshav shezikani HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lagia la'Eretz Yisrael, blessed be God that brought me here. I see that my original pshat was wrong. And it's just interesting because they didn't have computers. The Ramban didn't delete anything. He just has the original explanation. And then he says, now that I'm here, I see that Rachel really could have been buried in Marat HaMachpelah. It really is close to Marat HaMachpelah, and it was a decision that Yaakov Avinu made to bury her al haderech and not take her to Marat HaMachpelah. Okay? So, we saw a really fascinating parsha and fascinating Rambans. We saw a description of the fight with Esav, that Esav really, really did want to destroy Yaakov, and at the last minute, God made a miracle. More importantly, we saw that God made a miracle, perhaps in response to the hishtadlut, to the efforts that Yaakov made. That Yaakov really was afraid. The Ramban doesn't think we should not be afraid. He thinks we should trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we have to make plans. We have to be active ourselves. In response to our plans, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make a miracle for us, as he did with Esav. We saw how it worked out with Shechem and Hamor, how Yaakov was there, but he thought the plan was that either they won't get a bris milah and the people will just steal Dinah back, or they will get a bris milah, then everybody will be sick, and we'll just go in and take Dinah. And Shimon and Levi took the law into their own hands, and the sense you get in the Ramban is that really bothered him. The fact that Anshe Shechem weren't Chayiv Misa, and Shimon and Levi killed them. Till today, we deal with moral issues like that, without taking a stand on today's issues. It's a big point. The Ramban on Vatamat Dvorah Meineket Rivka, how it was really the death of Rivka, and why was it? And that's why Yaakov Avinu was mourning, and that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu paid him a shiva visit. Why is it in the Torah? Because of Esav. Because at her funeral, only Esav was there. If anybody was there, it was Esav. And that's not something that should be celebrated. And finally, the end of the parsha, when Rachel dies and she's buried there, there's the Ramban saying originally his pshat was she was buried someplace in Binyamin, and now that he's come to Eretz Yisrael and he's seen the place, he knows for a fact that the pshat is that Kever Rachel is where we think it is, Ba'od kivrat eretz lavo Ephrata, right outside of Ephrat. It's currently in Beit Lechem. We do have access to it, but it's currently in Beit Lechem. But it's really outside of Ephrat, which is close to Marat HaMachpelah and Chevron. And Yaakov Avinu really could have brought her there if he wanted to, but B'Nevuah and otherwise, he had different plans for her future, for what she's going to mean to Klal Yisrael, and that's what he explains at the end of the parsha. And the Ramban saw that only when he came to Eretz Yisrael, not before. Okay, that's it for today. Yashkoch to everybody, and see you, God willing, next week. Shabbat Shalom.